Right. Thank you so much, Christian. I thought that was all about me, but it wasn't. I would like to thank our wonderful technicians as well. We have... we have Hannes and Tobias, and I'm told that if you go to 0 channel, you get film sound, and then on 1 or 2, you get German or English. So, right. Okay. On the 1st of July, on the 1st of this very month, this headline, this front page appeared in London Evening Standard. It says the £1 billion swine flu jab blunder, okay? Well, 24 years ago, in 1986, when our program AIDS, the Unheard Voices, was transmitted on Channel 4 dispatches, we had expected headlines something like these to appear about the big AIDS blunder. Mind you, in this they didn't admit that the whole of the science behind the so-called H1N1 swine flu virus was wrong, but it would have been a start. And now they've ended up burning the 20 million surplus doses of vaccine bought by the British government. They couldn't return them because in the midst of the panic surrounding the so-called pandemic, the first supplier of vaccines couldn't meet the orders, and the second, Hoffmann La Roche, refused to agree an out clause with the government. Think of the fear and wasted energy surrounding this most recent exercise in plague terror, not to mention the money, £1.3 billion to be exact. And so it has been with AIDS. And I've had the job of going back in time to gather a video history of the AIDS dissident movement. The video history you will see today draws mainly from our archive, that's the Immunity Resource Foundation archive, which houses the Meditel and Continuum magazine archives. The clips you will see have been converted to DVD from different secondary sources like VHS, Hi8, Mini DV, and to transfer them from master, which I would like to have done, would have cost thousands. So the quality is not going to be perfect at all. But thanks to our wonderful technicians, we're going to do what we can. So, 24 years ago, we certainly started off with a bang. No wonder we thought we were going to change the world. Here's how the first dispatches was headlined on Channel 4 back in 1986. First.
Millions of pounds are being ploughed into the campaign against AIDS. In the battle against the disease, medical research has been almost exclusively devoted to defeating the now infamous HIV virus. But tonight's dispatch listens to the previously unheard voices of medical science, which say HIV is not the cause of AIDS. If the HIV theory is misguided, both research effort and money are being channeled away from the real cause of the disease, and the vilification of thousands of people who are HIV positive is not only unjust but cruelly wrong.
As some of you will know, that program, produced by Jad Adams and Michael Verney-Elliott, went on to win the Royal Television Society Award. That's the highest accolade in Britain. On their AIDS research trip to the USA, Jad came across Peter Duesberg's Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences article. So we decided to ditch the storyline that we had called Bad Blood and focus on this distinguished professor of molecular biology who was causing such a stir from the Stanley Lab at Berkeley. 24 years ago, here's reporter Michael Verney-Elliott conducting the first of many interviews with Peter Duesberg.
The orthodox belief is that HIV infects the body and then lies dormant for several years before destroying the immune system. Duesberg finds this absurd.
It is dormant all the time. It never becomes active. It is dormant to begin with, it's dormant when you die from it, it's dormant when you suffer from it. There's no report in the literature describing the virus ever to be active in a patient, in a human being, only in cell culture. So it's always dormant. That is, in fact, one of the paradoxes of the viral hypothesis. There is no parasite that I know of among viruses and bacteria and fungus and anything that is dormant while it's pathogenic. This one is. That's one of the major reasons why I don't believe that this virus is the cause of AIDS.
After this, we moved on to make the AIDS Catch documentary, which caused an avalanche of complaints from the AIDS establishment. Channel 4 and Meditel were denounced and taken before the Broadcasting Complaints Commission, where we were found guilty of being unfair to the subject of AIDS. But David Lloyd, our commissioning editor at Channel 4, persevered, and we went on to make AZT Cause for Concern, reflecting Duesberg's views on the toxicity of AZT, the views of pioneering AZT critic John Lauritsen, of groups like Heal New York and other independent-minded souls from the gay community like Michael Callan, and gay groups on the east and west coast of America. They were all seeing so many young men dying from the effects of high-dose AZT. This was one of the darker periods of AIDS history, and there was great concern at the time from some brave and outspoken members of the scientific community in the United States.
I think the central fact is that despite 5 years of AZT in trials and 4 on the open market, people keep dying in large numbers. And hence, it is clearly not as wonderful a drug or a lifesaver as it is made out.
First of all, I think it's self-evident that our study does not provide the kind of benefit that everyone wished for. It can't be a secret that patients wanted something that would help them live longer. Unfortunately, it has not demonstrated that, and therefore this has to be unwelcome news.
Well, the effect of AZT on body cells as a whole is very deleterious because it prevents cells from replicating. There's a second point in that cells that may survive AZT may themselves become cancerous. So there's a double danger for AZT the way I see it.
John Lauritsen had by now written his seminal articles about AZT in the New York Native and had dug out the Freedom of Information papers pointing to the dishonest and fraudulent use of data from the AZ2 Phase 2 trials.
There were so many contradictions, but the real horror of this study only became apparent after going through documents which were obtained under the Freedom of Information Act. And it indicated that there had been not only sloppiness of every conceivable sort, but that there had been actual cheating in a number of areas. It indicated that the study had become unblinded very quickly in the first few weeks. Although it was planned as a double-blind, placebo-controlled study, in fact, it was nothing of the kind. Both patients and doctors knew who was getting AZT and who was getting placebo.
It was a whole generation of young gay men who were suffering and dying agonizing deaths from the effects of AZT. And yesterday, in fact, I went into your exhibition here in the big hall. It's an exhibition of the very brilliant Keith Haring, the pop art star from New York with astonishing talent, who died of alleged AIDS-related complications aged 32 in 1990. Now, there wasn't a single gay man who had high doses of AZT in the late 80s who survived. A whole generation was wiped out. Now, concerned citizens in New York at the time, like Michael Elner and Frank Bonakis of Heal New York, could see at first hand what was going on around them, better, of course, than those physicians and scientists in their ivory towers. Never will I forget meeting Alan Roundtree. Here he describes what it was like to take AZT, and he died not long after this interview.
At first, good. Oh boy, I gained weight, and I said, boy, this stuff must be working. And then about another 2 weeks later, it did start working. The headaches came, the dizziness, the nauseousness, and the whole time I had fingernails that were so black, it looked like I had nail polish on, you know. And the upset stomachs, nothing tastes right, food or anything. And the main thing of it, it'll affect you so where you couldn't listen to people because you don't want to hear them because you're hurting so bad. And it left me impudent. It destroyed my hopes for living, you know.
It's 1992 now. Our film AZT Cause for Concern was transmitted and wins the Medical Journalists Association Award. But the powers that be, both in the drug industry and in government, won't be shifted. How could they be? It turned out that the running costs of our all-parliamentary group on AIDS in the House of Commons itself were funded almost entirely with money from the Wellcome Foundation, manufacturers of AZT. But something really encouraging did happen. In Holland, some enlightened souls decided to hold the Amsterdam Alternative AIDS Conference. It was here in Amsterdam 18 years ago that Luc Montagnier first announced that you could live quite happily for the rest of your life with HIV. Remember that Robert Gallo had said that if you had what he described as HIV, it was like being hit by a truck. In other words, you've had it.
But Luc Montagnier believes HIV needs cofactors in order to cause AIDS. And he admits there are many unanswered questions. For example, people can have HIV and not progress to AIDS.
We are seeing people which have been infected for 9, 10 years or more, 10, 12 years, and they are still in good shape. Their immune system is still good. And it is unlikely those people will come down with AIDS later.
For some time now, gay men like Michael Callan and Frank Bonakis had been speaking out about the risks leading to immune breakdown associated with a fast-track, high-risk lifestyle involving recreational drugs and drug-assisted sex. Here is Frank explaining his views.
In the course of the years, I have known thousands of people who have been diagnosed. And in my present daily life, at least 100 a day come in and out of my life. I know personally now over 260 who have been diagnosed and died. And all of these people were addicts, alcoholics. I'm not talking necessarily about simple things like just beer or whiskey or marijuana or even heroin. I'm talking about drugs that like ecstasy, Special K, MDA, and things of every poppers, these types of chemicals that stay in the body and that are not easily detoxified.
What does that lead you to conclude?
Well, for me, it makes me lean towards a immune dysfunction from chemical abuse, toxicity.
That was Frank speaking when we were all at the Berlin World AIDS Conference. This conference in the summer of 1992 was a place of bitter conflict. It's important for us to remember today the level of censorship that existed then and continues today. Many dissidents attended from all over the world the Berlin World AIDS Conference, and I kept a video diary which was later turned into Diary of an AIDS Dissident for Sky News.
John Lauritsen arrived from New York today, and the long, hot summer of dissent truly began. He brought a case full of his book, The AIDS War, hot off the press. It chronicles the story of the AIDS dissident movement. Tomorrow we're going to Berlin to present the dissident voice at the World AIDS Conference. Why did he call his book The AIDS War?
Using a metaphor of war, saying that the AIDS phenomenon is like a war with the terrible loss of life and suffering, and also profiteering, propaganda, treachery, espionage, sabotage, and all of the things that we associate with the war, and of course intense censorship in trying to get out the truth about AIDS.
Robert Laarhoven had arrived from Holland, and he had a car stacked high with dissident literature. Thank you.
We worked quickly to get our literature into the conference and onto the press racks as soon as possible. Robert Laarhoven from the Amsterdam group had prepared, with the help of Peter Raat, a formidable selection of dossiers. These included the journal Rethinking AIDS, from the Group for the Scientific Re-Evaluation of the HIV/AIDS Hypothesis, a group comprising 150 scientists and researchers, including a Nobel Prize winner. Our efforts were futile. Within hours, all the dossiers in the press lounge were confiscated by the organizers. But Robert managed to get some onto a stand in one of the main conference halls.
Sorry. The level of censorship. What number was that, Hannes, please? 9. Oh, right, I've skipped a page. It was possible to confront at that conference Dr. Robert Gallo and the panel during the press conferences. However, the weeding out process of press representation surrounding the Mexico World AIDS Conference 2 years ago has ruled confrontations like these out. Journalists seeking accreditation had to supply 3 published articles or videos before they could attend. And I heard yesterday at our press conference here in Vienna that independent journalists here had had a really difficult time getting through the same kind of scrutiny.
We decided this was the time to put some important points to Dr. Gallo.
A question for Dr. Gallo. Professor Robert Root Bernstein, author of Rethinking AIDS, has said that by the end of the century we'll know everything there is to know about HIV and nothing about AIDS. Given that all of Professor Peter Duesberg's predictions have come true, namely that there's been no heterosexual spread of AIDS in the Western world and that AZT doesn't work, when will you, Dr. Gallo, agree that we need to fund a total reappraisal of the HIV/AIDS hypothesis, not dictated to by the search for endless, new, useless, and damaging antivirals?
Okay, thank you for the statement. Short answer.
I think Dr. Ruth Bernstein doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay.
I would like
no discussion, please. Sorry. Next question. Up to there.
The answer is, I think he's wrong, and I think any rational person who's looked at this carefully, slowly, and is trained has come to the same conclusion that he's wrong. I don't influence funding. I'm not a director of an institute. I do my work. I'm working on HIV as the cause of this disease. I have since 1984. If you and Ruth Bernstein don't believe it, so be it. Do your own work on what you think the cause is and don't bother me.
Thank you. Next question.
The battle was on. Ironically, our enemies were gay lobby groups like ACT UP, who had been brought over from London, bussed in strategically to protest to say there weren't enough antivirals, and they were paid to come by Wellcome, the manufacturers of AZT.
We now learn that members of the Berlin dissident group with anti-Wellcome banners had been attacked by ACT UP and their banners burned.
group from ACT UP people. They come out of the building from the Congress, and they made a demonstration, and they give statements against the British government, and suddenly some people out of this group come to us, and they took our posters and burned them.
Peter Schmidt, who'd been filming the goings-on, had been ordered to erase his tapes by one of the German professors.
Professor Seichert not only want his picture delayed, he want to have the complete cassette. Well, I refused him. I said, no, there's no way. And so we only took out his pictures out of from the cassette.
Where?
Oh, here, right, where we are staying.
On this
Under
pavement?
the sun we made it with my camera.
We then heard that Robert Laarhoven had been turfed out of his stand inside the hall, barred from the conference and told to leave the country.
And they said that I had to leave on charges of trespassing. They took my press card, and two policemen brought me outside the conference hall.
And what did they say?
That is, if I ever cross this line, this line, I would be arrested. It became more clear to me that there is a very heavy censorship on dissident information, and I'm not afraid anymore to use words as AIDS fascism.
Well, this is the first AIDS conference ever where there's a real presence of honest AIDS dissidents, those of us who are opposed to the basic AIDS paradigm, the HIV/AIDS hypothesis, and AZT therapy. At the same time, there have been shocking events at this conference, which means that the people in the AIDS establishment are afraid of free speech.
The level of censorship was staggering. Celia Farber and John Lauritsen were amongst those who stuck it out to the bitter end.
I do get extremely despondent, and I've been feeling that. When I walk around here, I feel like this is so hopeless. What we are up against is a gargantuan, multi-billion-dollar infrastructure. And who do we think we are? Who do we think we are kidding? You know, I mean, but you have to just be Sisyphus, right? And keep pushing the rock up the hill and let it roll down again. There's no other choice. The only other option is to just turn around and walk away, which, well, obviously, we know what we know, so it's too late to do that.
So we rolled the rock up the hill to the last press conference. I had lost my crew, so took the small camera along with a shaking hand. We'd issued our own press release.
In doing this, I would like to ask Hager Mail, are you willing to apologize for the horrible acts of violence that you have condoned and for the acts of censorship for which you personally are responsible? You owe me and many people an apology. Can you do that, or will you refuse to do so?
May I answer shortly? Simply no. Since what you are saying is not the truth.
At the opening press briefing, Professor Habermehl had described people who question the role of HIV as mentally disturbed groups. Celia Farber took up the cudgels, reminding the panel that many distinguished scientists are questioning HIV.
Would you refer to Dr. Mullis, who's one of your colleagues, as mentally unstable, which is what you actually did? If you were not aware of this, now that you have been made aware of it, would you consider an apology?
It was remarkably hard to make any impact. Seasoned journalists like Neville Hodgkinson, who's with us today, highly respected as medical and science correspondent of the Sunday Times, in April 1992 published front-page news about the AIDS blunder. But, as Neville explains in this clip, it was so difficult to challenge such an entrenched orthodoxy.
Resistance to those who question the HIV/AIDS theory is fierce. Science editor Neville Hodgkinson has for several weeks in the Sunday Times reflected the arguments of Peter Duesberg and others who challenge the current AIDS orthodoxy.
The reaction has been quite puzzling, extraordinary really in many respects. I think perhaps the aspect that has astonished me most has been from other journalists, from medical and science writers who have been sweeping in their criticisms. They've called it irresponsible, they've called it ill-researched, they've suggested that we've simply taken what Duisberg said and reported it without thinking about it. All this kind of thing. They've said it's an old story. I've been astounded by this because I don't think there's ever been a story that I've been given the opportunity to put so much work in on, and in which we've so challenged the way that conventional scientists are thinking and arguing about something.
And Jad Adams, author of The Myth of HIV, addressing a London conference called AZT on Trial, echoes the frustration at the censorship and hostility that surrounded any challenge to the infectious hypothesis.
The next speaker was Jad Adams, author of AIDS, the HIV Myth. He produced and directed the first film we made about AIDS and has strong views about the way the dissident voice has been reported.
I've never done a story in which there was so much resistance to the story being told by my colleagues or by the establishment, or where lower standards prevailed in the supposed interests of the public good. There's resistance even to the reporting of views by dissidents, even to the reporting of the fact that there are dissidents. And when there was a breakthrough at the spring of last year, when the AIDS A Different View conference took place in Amsterdam, any reporting of the conference, almost any reporting, came with its own health warning, and here in the Independent we see those very words. It should carry a health warning. They referred to the conference as the spreading of a terrible myth.
Germany and Switzerland have an important history of dissidents. Early campaigners like Kavi Schneider and Peter Schmidt and their work with Berlin's community TV channel have to be mentioned. And then there's the ever tenacious, of course, well, Dr. Klaus Kernlein, who's here, Dr. Julian Sacher, who's here, and then there's Georg Winzergerode, who's here, and Tadeusz Rota. All these people are here, and lots of others, and please forgive me if I can't mention everybody by name. And from Switzerland, we have Michael Baumgartner, and we have Felix de Vries here. And with the next clip, I want to remember the late Professor Alfred Hessig, one of the founding members of the Bern Study Group, whose work is carried on today by Felix de Vries, Heinrich Kramer, Karl Krafeld, and others. Here's Alfred at a demonstration, he was by then in his late 80s, at a demonstration outside the Medical Research Council in London, protesting against the AZT Penta trials in children. He's with our staunch dissident colleague, Dr. Hector Simpson-Gildemeister, who sadly died last year.
Professor Alfred Hessig has flown in from Switzerland. He's a specialist in immunology and deeply opposed to the prescribing of AZT. He believes the medical profession has made a big mistake about the cause of AIDS. I snatched a few words with him earlier this morning in Regent's Park.
AIDS is certainly not a response to an infectious agent, the HIV virus. Primarily, it's a stress response with persistent formation within the body of inflammatory substances which, if they don't stop and go on in formation, lead to death.
He believes that the inflammatory response causes too much iron to accumulate in the body, causing iron overload.
So the key mechanism to prevent AIDS is to lower the iron level. And this is probably very important to avoid the disorder.
Over the last 20 years, the Perth Group, as it's known, from Perth, Western Australia, has produced an enormous body of academic work addressing issues such as the non-isolation of HIV and the iniquities of an HIV test that, they say, doesn't find a virus, just antibodies to so-called HIV proteins that are in all of us anyway. Here's a rare appearance of physicist Eleni Eliopoulos and Dr. Valander Turner.
If there is such a thing as an AIDS-causing retrovirus, then its unique body part, that is its proteins,
should only be found in HIV-positive individuals and individuals who have AIDS. But this is not the case. All the principal HIV proteins have been found in all manner of cells from healthy human beings who are HIV negative.
So can these commonly occurring protein markers ever prove the presence of HIV?
There is no way to test for HIV. This is because all the tests are based on indirect markers, none of which has been validated by proving that the markers are positive only when the virus is present.
Many of us know what it's like to lose a close friend, and Hugh Christie was a friend to me. We shared offices and we shared dreams of winning the battle to establish the truth about AIDS. He was a brilliant editor of Continuum magazine. Sadly, he died the year after this interview.
It was startling that Professor Montagnier decided to acknowledge in his interview with Jamel Tahi in Continuum that as far back as 1983, his team were not able to purify anything that you might call HIV, despite what he termed a Roman effort. So who should be surprised that when the same thing was attempted by expert laboratories in Germany and the United States, who published their results in the journal Virology, what they found was proteins and cellular debris.
Hugh Christie and I co-produced the program for Mnet South Africa. The key interview was with the then president, Thabo Mbeki. That was an unforgettable experience, and to this day I seethe about the way Mbeki was treated by his own countries and the world's press. If ever there was an injustice, it was the way Mbeki's stance against antiviral drugs was portrayed by a savage ruling scientific oligarchy which held the media, and in particular the Guardian newspaper and the BBC, in its sway.
How do you feel about the reaction of some of your country's leading virologists and intellectuals to your position?
I get the sense that, as I was saying earlier, that we've all of us been educated into one school of thought. I'm not surprised at all that you would find, I'm quite sure, among the overwhelming majority of scientists in this field in this country, people who would hold a particular point of view because that's all they were exposed to. This other point of view, which is, I think, part of what is frightening, this alternative point of view, in a sense, has been blacked out. It must not be heard, mustn't be seen. I mean, even that's the demand now. Why is Thabo Mbeki talking to discredited scientists, giving them legitimacy? It's a very worrying thing that anybody can say today, in today's world, that there is a point of view that is prohibited, that's banned, that they're heretics who must be burnt at the stake. And it's all said in the name of science and health. Can't be right.
A few brave souls from the medical orthodoxy have stood firm throughout, and one of them is distinguished consultant obstetrician and gynecologist Dr. Christian Fiala, our host today. Here is a snatched conversation with him when he went to support President Mbeki in Pretoria and joined his presidential panel on AIDS.
Usually in the past, it was supposed that developing countries were to learn from industrialized countries. And I would say this is a very good example that, in fact, nowadays, in many occasions, it's the other way around. Europe and the United States can learn a lot from South Africa, from African people, in the way of discussing openly open questions in the field of science. So a discussion that couldn't have taken place during the last 10, 15 years in Europe or in the United States could have taken place here in this country.
Why couldn't it take place elsewhere?
Apparently the pressure has been too strong and prevented such a discussion to happen.
What would you see as the main advance today at the end of all these discussions?
The main advance was that it has been officially recognized that since 15 years there are open questions. And there have been a lot of institutions, a lot of people being very busy to give the impression in the field of science, in the field of politics, to make believe that there are no open questions. And so today, probably for the first time, there's an official recognition that there, in fact, there are open questions, and this should be discussed. And there should not be something like science by majority. As you might remember, it has been last year that the Pope officially accepted that the world was round. And this is a very nice example where you get if you accept science by majority.
Ekaterinburg, Russia, must feature in this video history. It was a fantastic journey, all the way to the Urals in the east, to take part in a conference fired by the anger of Russian families who felt assaulted by the huge amounts of World Health money flooding into their schools to teach their children, some as young as 7, how to make love with a condom or else they would die. And young IV drug users were being dumped into clinics where they inevitably progressed to TB and tested HIV antibody positive, but were denied TB drugs. Only antivirals were available to them, generously provided by UNAIDS and others. Christine Maggiore made a moving contribution at this conference. Anthony Brink, lawyer and dissident writer, helped organize it, and he presented the Perth Group's paper on the non-isolation of HIV there. The simultaneous translation problems, actually they weren't simultaneous, they were consecutive translation problems, made it possible to show only a tiny bit of Anthony's introduction.
Good afternoon, everybody. Добрый день. And I'd like to make a few preliminary remarks before I begin.
Перед тем, как начать, я хотел бы высказать несколько предварительных замечаний.
I'd firstly like to thank Joan and the organizing committee for convening this extraordinary conference.
Прежде всего, я хотел бы поблагодарить Германа Сергеевича и вообще всю организацию за подобную великолепную конференцию.
It's an extraordinary service to truth and humanity.
And here is the new generation of filmmakers. Brent Leung and his audacious feature film, The House of Numbers. What a feat. The film has won Brent and his producer 13 film festival awards for Best Documentary. Here's how members of the audience reacted after seeing the film.
Sir, what did you think about the movie? I thought it was very eye-opening. There's a lot of things I didn't even know about. I think that the world needs to see what they've got to say.
I just saw the world premiere of House of Numbers, and I came to the film thinking that I knew everything that most people think they know about HIV and AIDS, and I really didn't expect to have my opinion moved one way or the other, and I was proven wrong. I definitely now think that there's not a consensus about what the scientific community believes about HIV and AIDS, and there's a considerable amount of disagreement, and I've never seen that presented before until I saw this movie. I read a blurb in the newspaper, the Nashville Scene, saying that, it was a small description of the film, saying that it was a portrayal of people who deny that HIV is responsible for causing AIDS. And to be honest with you, I came to see the film wanting to see who these crazy people were who deny that HIV causes AIDS. And, I'm not convinced one way or the other now. I think there are some scientists who study this that say, it definitely is. There are some who deny that that's the case. It's eye-opening. It makes you want to explore the issue a little bit more with an open mind now.
Nicole Zwirin came to the Oakland Rethinking AIDS conference last year, and she was still at film school then, and she made her first film there called AIDS Denialism, which has received great acclaim, and here's the beginning of it.
To the question that Nicole makes about common front, I think we are giving an example all over the planet of a unity, the different views, and how, for instance, Etienne has different views to Peter, and we have different views, but we are united. United against what? against pharmaceutical companies. We are united to save Africa. We are united to save the seropositive people. We are united to save people with the clinical manifestation with AIDS. And even that we have different views, we love each other.
People who call themselves AIDS dissidents may disagree on whether or not HIV exists inside the human body, but the premise that unites them is that HIV is not the cause of AIDS.
There are so many people I'd like to mention in this video history. Those who have helped support the Immunity Resource Foundation, you know who you are. I'll quickly do my list of appreciation to those others who've produced valuable programs and video material in this struggle, and others who've starred within them. Heal New York, Michael Elner, Tony Di Stefano. Tony Brown's Journal, USA. Alfredo Embiid in Spain. Stefano Gentiloni from Rai 2 in Italy. Perry Peltz, reporter on NBC, and other ABC reports by other reporters. WLIW New York State, Terrell Cass. Christine Majori and her husband, Robin Scoville. Jamel Tahi, Rob Drescher, Gary Null. And thanks to the following who are not here today, Professor Gordon Stewart, he's really sorry he couldn't be with us for health reasons. We have, of course, our revered professors here, Etienne de Haven, Henry Bauer. Then there's Dr. Roberto Giraldo from Colombia, who couldn't be here, Dr. Fabio Franchi, Luis Botinas from Spain, and Alex Russell from London. And remember our dear departed friends, the late Winifred Muebe, the late Cass Mann, the late Michael Verney Elliott, the late Dr. Hector Simpson Gildemeister. I always like to finish with these words from Celia Farber.
I think truth can be suspended, rerouted, rejected for astonishingly long periods of time. But I think it's kind of like energy. I don't think it can be destroyed. It is rather like an airplane in a holding pattern, and it does have to land somewhere eventually.